Welcome to my community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for joining us. A very warm welcome to our viewers around the world, those of you who continue to join us weekly via the World Wide Web. It is your weekly program that goes around Barbadian communities, stopping at various points and allowing you to either view or listen to what we consider the artifacts of Barbadian communities. In 2020, Jennifer Seeley, speaking about her community in St. John, made mention of the Estwicks and listed them as members of the Cheshire community. This year, 2021, we caught up with the man himself, Mr. Owen L. Estwick, who has served his community and country. With a sense of pride and duty, he now regales us with memories of his community. He starts right here in his hometown. But for him, his community extends beyond the boundaries of Cheshire. It encompasses the many areas he traversed daily as he made his way to and from that institution which he holds dearly to his heart, and whose auditorium is now dignified by his name. The entire area for Mr. Estwick is like hallowed ground, and this is forever cherished by him. He will also speak of a peculiar experience of the lodge school.
Now, I was born in a district called Cheshire, St. John, which is offshoot off the Eastmont Road. Eastmont now being a small plantation. In those days when the road was in reasonably good condition, because that is where I used to have to, I went to school from Cheshire to the lodge by passing through Eastmont to get to Coddington Plantation, then to get to go over the hill, Long Swamp we called it, through by the meter box, then on to law school. And of course, not all of us were privileged to have bicycles, so you're talking about walking to school. And not only walking to school, you're talking about hearing the rain coming down and having the dilemma of where do you shelter? Do you shelter in the canes or do you run back to see if you can get back home? Then you say, well, this time, shelter in the canes. You got to get to school now, and because you got wet, it looks like if your mother was careless, she didn't press your clothes. And we had some very, very strange boys in the thing who believed at that time that the law school should only have certain people in the front rows, and we knew our place. Our place. Is it ready? Yeah, you're talking 1947. You're talking 1947. The black boys sat in the back rows, and the white boys sat in the front rows. But we intermixed. We go on the pasture. You play football together. You play cricket together. You slap one on the head off and all that sort of thing. But the seating arrangement, I think, what contributed significantly to the seating arrangement at the lodge at the time. Lodge was a boarding school, and the overseas boarders started to come in at about Friday, Saturday, and even Sunday evening. The overseas boarders would come in depending on the flights. The local boarders would come in no later than Sunday evening. So what would happen is that the boys would secure desks. They would take a book and put in it. So when you went to school, and well, at first when you were ignorant, you would probably go up front looking in a desk to see where you could sit down properly. Because of not my inability to see over a fellow who had a big head or high shoulders, I would look around and I can't find nowhere to sit. So I go and sit down in the back and settle down there. The late Major Sam was appointed the first colored head boy. I understand that the prefix went to Mr. Evans's office. There was a chair on a table at the beginning of the headmaster's office. In those days, he had lived on the law school, and they just, with two exceptions, I'm told, deposited they placed their badges in, and it was a prefix revolt. So that was a not so pleasant experience, which Sam Hardy, who later became Major, had. That must have done something positive to him because he went on, he won the Island Scholarship, he went to Continental College in days when getting a degree was unheard of.
Life continued in Cheshire for a young Estwick, and he shared that small community with people like
The Harrises, the Smalls, who were related to the Harrises, the Higginsons, who lived next to me. That is how many houses there were. On the other side of the road, there was the Hunts, who had the most land in Cheshire small town, because their families were about 5 different Hunts living on family land, and they extended down to the front road next to Presentation Cottage. The church there, though, contiguous to that is Cheshire lands. And then there were the Batsons. The Hunts and the Batsons were related. And then there was one big house, which in my boyhood days was owned by a man called Herman Wilkie, a white man. And he left it to his son-in-law. And then when his son-in-law was ready to leave, Fred Paris, who was the headmaster of what we called the Society Boys School, is now Holy Cross. Fred Paris took up ownership, and I think his grandson, Fred Paris's grandson, he lives there now in the Cheshire House. But what was amusing about, no, it wasn't really amusing, it was a serious thing, because they had about 6 mango trees. It attracted boys from all the districts. My mother was very strict on the question of whether or not, what times I could go outside, because she knew early on mornings the boys from the other districts would come and check out the mango trees to see which mangoes had fallen from the tree and whether they could go in and reach the cat wire, pull the mangoes away. Matter of fact, they used to climb the tree sometimes, and I didn't even think about climbing the tree because I was always thinking about whether or not my mother was looking outside to make sure that I wasn't part of I can't call them a gang, but what are you gangs then? We used to play marble cricket in the road and hopscotch and hitty bitty, of course. We took advantage of moonlight nights. I get the impression the moon used to be bright in those days, but I'll tell you why. There weren't any street lights. So the extent to which the moon was shining would be determined by whether or not there were clouds or anything. So the moonlight used to be real bright in those days because there was darkness all around. But when we look forward to the moonlights because we could get a little extra, with permission, get a little extra time when outside, provided your mother could hear your voice.
there were several features on these communities. So important were these that they, in a sense, became permanent fixtures, so to speak. The village baker was one. Young Estwick recalls experiences with his grandmother of visiting the bakery and having to sit on the bench while his grandmother baked her bread.
I mentioned a few families. There was a woman called Mrs. Harris. She was the mother to the Harris that I identified on my way coming out of Cheshire. She had her own oven at Christmas time and other festivals when she was meet the requirements of the people where you carry stuff. And I had a long bench outside of the oven area, and people would sit on the bench depending on what time you came. Now, my grandfather died young, and from the time I came on the scene, my grandmother, she identified me as the person replacing my grandfather in life. So if she is going to bake, at Christmas time. You better believe when she said, oh, you gotta come and go with me. What it really meant is that I would go along with her. Obviously, you're gonna drop to sleep and lay down in her lap and keep her company until she could access whether it was phone she baking or bread she baking or whatever. I think that bread used to be sweeter than anything you could get though from any bakeries. But that is a real experience.
Now that brings us to shops. Jennifer Seeley listed a number of shops that existed in her time. Owen Estwick speaks now of what existed in his time. You would take note of a recurring feature of every shop in almost every program. You will also learn of who he regarded as the wealthiest black man in the parish of St. John. And you'll also learn about a very special spot in the cane ground where they enjoyed their lunch almost daily.
James A. Tudor had a shop right opposite to the small town, Small Hope. We're going to Small Hope. When you come to Small Town, you pass Presentation College, you turn right for Eastmont. But if you turn your head left on that road, that is where James A. Tudor shop used to be. The shop always had an extension where the boys would congregate to fire grog. But when our parents sent us at the shop, we had to keep a far right from the rum drinking section, you know. And then I think they used to put the showcase over on that side deliberately to pull you away, because what would you go to the shop for? You go to the shop because your mother sent you with the list, or or you wanted some sweeties, you know. But you couldn't hang around. I found it fascinating, and then when you left Small Town, you go up to Gall Hill, and there was one shop in Gall Hill. It used to be owned by B.L. Barrow, who was probably arguably the wealthiest black man in St. John in my time, because he owned property in Gall Hill, and all the people who were living in Gall Hill now were at some stage tenants of B.L. Barrow. And that land extended down to, it's contiguous to the lands now owned by John Foster. And the John Foster property extends right down to where I grew up in Cheshire, on the opposite side of the road. You'll see a cow farm. That ground used to be the vacation hiding place for a lot of us who found it difficult to wait until your mother tell you that lunch was served, so that we would just disappear in there. And the watchman came down one day, and he went in the caves and discovered that there were no canes in there. So he discovered that when we were playing cricket in the road, before or after lunch, that is where we used to take lunch breaks. You know, and he actually told us we wouldn't stop breaking the white man canes. Now the white man is supposed to be a Cottington plantation, because Small Hope was attached to Cottington for purposes of reaping. The tenants at Small Hope, were told by Mr. Barrow to stop paying rent and keep your house where it is, because he discovered that the practice by Cottington Plantation to annex and utilize the proceeds of Small Hope were irregular. So he just told his people who had become his constituents then, don't worry about it. He said, but Mr. Barbie, we can't do that. Mr. Farmer will put me in court. He said, "You here to tell you? You think I would give you bad advice?" But the underlying truth was that Cottington did not have any legal authority to uh, to collect those rents.
Good representation. Now, community centers are important facilities that give people an opportunity to socialize, to learn, and to access key services. They are healthy outlets for the energies of our younger generation. And of course, when used properly, they could prevent antisocial behavior. There was a social or cultural center here in St. John.
God Hill. Nearly shed a tear last Sunday morning when I came down, and I noticed that the social center, what used to be one of the earliest community centers, but the community center meant we would hold not only dances but services of songs, and then a lot of commercial activity was generated out of that thing after they had that facility. It used to be packed every weekend, and then people started to hold functions in there. They made it multi-purpose, but at first it was all about dancing.
And that leads us directly to an activity that occurred in the same center, and which in a sense is grounded in the Bible, 1 Chronicles 6:31. And these are they whom David set over the service of song in the house of the Lord after the ark had rest.
Services of song or a feature of social activity that Sunday evenings. You gotta remember you in the pre-rediffusion days. So when you had a service song, what would happen? What would happen is that somebody would buy two pigs or something, so pork chops. You were lucky if you got anybody could go out and buy any of the pork. I think because the butcher would tell you, the village butcher would tell you, I killing this because we got a service song tomorrow. And one day we had a cricket match at pool, and Stanton Paris was bringing a cricket team called the Pakistan or something, so he used to call them. And he stopped, and he saw some people waiting down in one of the pool number one or number two, I can't remember which the numbers now. And he got curious and reversed the car in there and asked him, "What going on here?" He said, they said, we're preparing these pork chops for a service song at 5 o'clock. He said, "How soon again, Dad?" He said, "Well, I want the first set that come out of that thing." I said, "Well, we can't do that. Because if you buy and carry all them pork chops, no." Stanley said, "Well, that still can't be no problem. You ain't gonna buy you could buy a pig from and kill another pig for the people that you asked out to, they used to have this expression that the meat asked out or something. So Santa came up to the thing and brought these pork chops and said that all we do is drink rum and nothing wrong with that, but you gotta have some meat. And he produced these pork chops. Of course, he cut them down in pieces so everybody could get a piece. But it created quite a big stir in the tenantry that Sunday evening. But tell you something, potato chips weren't in vogue yet. So a fellow would buy a couple of pork chops and he just eat them so. The only other thing that was on sale in those days was snowballs. You had the snowball vendor. The snowball carrots were with fellas with bicycles, and they had the snowball thing inside of it. They used to have freight bicycle trays, But those were a few features because there was no lunch. For instance, in BCL cricket, there was not the whole idea about lunch. You gotta be joking. Lunchtime, you could get your time, but not your lunch. You're looking at the 40s and 50s, and snowball carrot was was a must in the district. And matter of fact, after lunch in your house on Sunday, when you hear the snowball cart man out, you see all people in the village come outside, and if he was an itinerant, but the ones that was be stationary would be at the cricket ground. And of course, they must have made something. The next thing, you know, the fella graduated from bicycle to the car or something so, and sold from then in the back of the car. It's just like the days of the coolie man. You hear about them fellas?
Tell me about that.
Well, they used to come out every Sunday. The one that I know best is a fella called, the first coolie man I saw in the district was a man called Solomon. And he came out on Sundays to collect his thing, because, you know, he would bring a piece of cloth, dress or pants or whatever, and you say, well, I ain't got no money now, and well, keep it, I will come back, give me something, and people just a few shillings or something, a shilling a week or something. So, but the thing that made him survive was that he was catering to a lot of people, so the shillings used to add up, and I said he used to ride a bicycle from town. Oh yeah, I can remember it was a green Triumph. Yeah, yeah. And then it was the Humber and the Rally. Those were the three brand name bicycles that in my time, and the fellas rode. And then after he came up, we must have shared the information with his people. But it used to create a little tension in the district, because there was sniping remarks like, I know you ain't gonna trust from me, but you will trust from so and so, you know. But of course, I don't know if anybody would tell the other fellow what so and so say, but that was no concern. I had a father who could not even stomach the fact of my mother looking outside, and she had to tell the coolie man she was safe. No, he felt that it was somewhere they were exploiting pain, and he just developed a thing. And someone would come in my father's absence and say things like, "I know your husband don't like me."
From the itinerant traders to the sending out of brides. It was a term used in Barbados to describe the standard of work which a needle worker or a seamstress had reached. Mr. Estwick explains.
You use the expression send out brides. You like, you know, the jargon, because when you hear send out brides, it means that person was a class, right? Other people had machines, a singer machine, and would sew. But when you were referred to as one who sent out brides, you know that you were cut above the others. God Hill was the closest place. I had a friend whose sister, he was a tailor, and his sister was a seamstress. But in my actual district, people used to, I had 1-2 people with machines, and the ones who were shrewd enough to buy a machine and would start practicing. But there were others who, in the early days, were sent to needlework because you had to pay school fees. Now you will not understand the significance of when free secondary education was introduced. What that did. I think the most significant thing in my living memory that happened in this country was the grant of free secondary education. But there were a few people in the parish who knew that, or deemed to be a cut above the rest, and they would get to make wedding garlands.
The church played a central role in the life of this community. In a previous program, Sir Henry Fraser, who, like Mr. Estwick, attended St. John's Parish Church, spoke of his family paying pew rent. What about the Estwicks? Did they pay pew rent?
Well, I didn't pay pew rent because I sat in the back seat, but let me tell you, my father paid pew rent. They had about the first 8 rows in which people paid pew rent. But in those days of the vestry system as it was then, in total control and the plantocracy being the equivalent of the church council, those people sat in the first 8 rows, thing, and we were people of my ilk would have to sit with the back row. Johnny, you ever heard that expression? You ever heard the expression? You know what it meant?
Don't be embarrassed. The first step in learning anything is the acknowledgement of ignorance. I don't know, therefore I go in search of. Teach us, Mr. Estwick.
We had a significant number of Caucasian boys at elementary school, you know. And I have reason to believe that one of those ships that came down from Scotland, the fellas were told to jump off somewhere along the east coast, maybe call it Savannah, down to Azores. And that strip of land in St. John produced people of Caucasian background for the elementary schools. When I went to school, St. John's Boys School attracted a lot of people of that ilk because the headmaster was himself a Caucasian. So what happened is that the colored people started to say, well, if paying for the pew would enable me to sit where I want to sit, I can pay the little pew rent. It was not a terrible amount of money. My father paid a little 8 cents a week or whatever he had to pay. And there's just going to be a special service at the church. The sexton takes the benches, some benches, and barred off enough of the pews up front to make sure that if the people come to church, they will get some place to sit down. My father goes, finds a bench in his pew. He takes up the bench. Sexton, what do you think you're doing? He said, I'm moving this out of my pew. And they told him struggle and struggle in the presence of the rector, because he apparently had given the sexton the instruction to bar them off. Now he was a half-caste fella from Sabre or one of them places. He was not regarded. He had straight hair, but he was visibly not white, right? So he was very, very much prejudiced against black people. He come to St. Joseph, he came to St. John, and then he returned from St. John. But he's not a pleasant memory. I was his older server, but he's not a pleasant memory.
And that is exactly why these programs are produced, to provide that stage for Barbadians to tell the stories of their communities and so enrich the lives of all of us. Thank you very much, Mr. Estwick. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Thanks for staying with me. Until next week at the same time, take good care of yourself and look out for the interests of your neighbors. Goodbye for now, and every blessing.